think we can start. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. This is the East Central and South Africa Microsoft Excel Forum. And we are privileged today to have William Kiarie. So the people hosting the webinar is us, Crisp Excel Training and Consulting. We are corporate and individual trainers on advanced Excel and consultants on data management and analytics. Our presenter today is William Kiarie. William is a seasoned business intelligence and data visualization expert with over 9 years experience in the industry. So if you have any problem in any of these areas, you can consult him. Advanced Excel and dashboard reporting, report automation using Excel, VBA, and Power Query, and data analytics and visualization. These are social medias which I'll share on the chat so that you can be able to follow him, and also please go and support him by buying this course that he has in Udemy. So the topic of today is advanced pivot table tricks to boost your productivity. And I'll stop sharing so that we can welcome Mr. William to continue with the rest of the presentation. Welcome, William. William?
Thank you very much. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, sure. So long as you can hear me, I suppose the rest can hear me. If anyone is not able to get me through, you can chat so that we see what to adjust. But I'm happy to be here upon the invitation of Crispo. I'm excited to be your presenter today. As it was mentioned to us, we shall be looking at pivot tables, and the introduction has been done. And today we are going to do that presentation from the beginner level all the way to the advanced level of pivot tables. I can guarantee you some of the things that we shall see are things that probably you already know, but others, like it is the norm, we always have to learn one or two things. So welcome everyone, and would want to encourage you that if you have any question, please you can do the chat or wait until the end of the presentation so that you can raise them. We'll be able to address the same. So you'll allow me to just do some setup here so that I'm able to kick off. So just a second, I'll put my camera off briefly and then I will put it on. Right, so I am based in Nairobi and I'll be a presenter. I work with data psychoanalytics and I'm happy to be here. So allow me to present my screen so that we can kick off. So I'll share my screen. I'll do my entire screen to be safe. So I hope we have the screen there.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So we have the data that is shown on the screen, and I would want to be able to summarize that information using many different ways, but today we are going to do pivot tables. So with pivot tables, we are able to create interactive reports that are able to change upon the user selection. So the one of the dynamic features that we have in Excel to create reports. So before you do any pivot table, usually there's few checks that you'd want to do, and probably just to say from the onset that the data that you see here is anonymized, so that it doesn't collide with any other company. If you see anything that resembles your company details, just take it is coincidental. But usually when data needs to be analyzed using pivot tables, one of the things that you have to ensure is that every column that you have in your data is labeled so that you don't have anything that is blank. And also in terms of the rows, you shouldn't have blank rows in between or columns. That way it will make life easy for you to analyze. Now, when you're working with pivot tables, I usually encourage from the onset that you convert your data to a special table, or what we call a smart official Excel table. And the reason being is if you've worked with pivots before, you'll notice if data changes or you have extra rows added in your data, then you have to refresh every pivot table at a go. And that can be cumbersome. But if your data from the word go has been converted to a special Excel table, then what that means is you only need to click refresh button once. And therefore, at the onset, I would want us to convert this to a special table. There are many ways to go about it. I use the easiest one, which is Control T, T for table. And the dialog that you see there is the one that usually appears, and it will highlight for you the data set. So long as you're within the region where the data was, then it will indicate with this running ants round that that's where the data is. Of course, you have to check this button, my table has headers, so that it can detect the first row to be column headers for your data. Then once you do that, you'll notice two things. It gives you these alternating color bands, and you also have a new tab on the ribbon there that is called table design. And within this new tab, you can change a few things. I just want to change only two things. One is the style. I prefer working with the light style so that it doesn't have the banded rows. You can work with any. And then on the left side, I want to give this new table a name. I'll call it T sales, for just table sales in short. And that's the table that we have. It's a special table. Probably later in other presentations, we can look at the features of these special tables. Now, pivot tables are usually available from the Insert tab. Anytime you feel you want to use a pivot table, you go to the Insert tab. That's where you see this pivot table on the left side. It has a couple of things depending on what version of Excel you're using, but more often than not, you just need to click the button itself, and then you'll get this dialog box that appears. And of course, if you're starting out, then this one will be showing you the data range, which in our case, we've called it T sales. If you haven't given it a name, then what it will show is the range itself, the cell references. Then here you can choose whether you want to create the report in a new sheet or an existing worksheet, one of the existing worksheets down here. In this case, let me just go with the default and press OK. So usually this is what you will get if you're starting out with pivot tables. For some reason, I prefer not starting from column A in my reports or any data. So let me just right click column A and I click to insert. Now, when I'm inside this range of the pivot table, I get also something on the right side that is called the pivot table field list. And usually this one just shows you the columns on the right here, the columns that are in your source data. And you also get two contextual tabs up there. They should come at the far end, the far right. There is one pivot table analyze and there is one design. Now, if you go back working in your Excel and you don't see analyze, probably if you're using Excel 2010 or earlier, it will be options, or pivot table tools, options and design. So in our case, so long as you're using Excel 2016 and higher, it will be analyze or pivot table analyze and design. Now, before we do anything on this pivot table, one of the tips I would want to cover is regarding the layout you see on the right side, the pivot table field list. Usually this is the default layout where you have the columns on the upper side and the lower side has 4 boxes where you drag and drop the columns you want to use for your report. One of the things you may want to change is from this gear icon or the settings icon there. If you click, it gives you several choices here. And one of the things I do change, and in fact, this is what I use for default, the second option, the field section and area section to be shown side by side. So I'll select that one, and you can see immediately how it reflects on the screen. And this to me is a better view because I have more columns. If you have many columns, then this would be a good one to work with. And the zones where you drag and drop are now on the right side. The other thing you may want to do is to probably go to the same icon and then choose to sort A to Z. By default, it will sort the columns as they are arranged in your source data. But in this case, you can also do A to Z. It makes it easy for you to just scan or look for a certain column. Now, once you have that setting done, and this one you just do once, it will reflect in future files that you use for pivot tables in the same machine. So I will want to create the first report. The boxes that you see on the right side, what we are calling the field screen, whatever you put in the rows will always go to the rows box. Whatever you put, in the rows in your Excel, what you put on the columns will always go into the columns of the Excel itself. And whatever you want to aggregate should always go to the values box. So in our case, the amount is what we want to aggregate. Now, if I just put a check mark on the amount, because it's a numeric field, it will always go into the values box. And that's why, for any numeric field, that's the default behavior. So we get that as the total amount. We probably want to slice and dice this further into different ways. And therefore, what I will do is I will take, probably I want to see the regions in the columns. Then I can put them on the columns. As you can see on the screen, and I hope it's visible on your end, is that it puts the regions across in the different columns. If I just uncheck and check again, you'll see by default, anything that is text string will always go into the rows if you just put a check mark. And therefore, if you want it to go to the columns, you have to drag and drop. But anything you want to go to the columns, you can always put, in the rows, you can always put a check mark. So in this case, let me also put in the category and also probably put in the channel. So by just putting a check mark or dragging and dropping the fields from the columns list here to the boxes on the right, it will give you the summary just like that. And if you are to create this one probably using some ifs or other formulas, then probably this one would be, not many people do that with some ifs, but this one is direct and straightforward. You just need to drag and drop. So what we have here is a summary that breaks down by the category, the channel, and then the region, the product, category, channel, and region. The reason why I put this pivot like this is because there are a couple of things that I want you to pay attention to. One is that the default way this pivot appears is that it gives you column labels and row labels as part of what you see on the column headers. And probably you'd want to have maybe region or show the category as the name itself. The same case with the sum of amount. So that in itself is a factor of the layout of the pivot table, the default layout. To change that, you go to the design tab. From the design tab, on the left side, you have the report layout. The default one is the compact form. Then you can choose either outline or tabular, depending on what you want to use. I prefer most of the times to just go with tabular, and immediately you can see the yellow cells which I had colored. You can see it gives me the word region instead of the column labels as it were previously. And secondly, these two columns, the channel and the category, are now two columns. Initially, they were indented within column B. But when you change the default layout from compact to outline or tabular, it will always separate the different fields into separate columns. The other thing probably that you'd want to do here is to update these number formats. Usually I see most people just highlight like this and then go to home and apply the formatting from this section, the 1000 separator. But with pivot tables, you're supposed to right click and go to number format. When you right click and go to number format, you get this dialog box, and then you can apply the formatting that you want to use. In my case, it will be a number. I want 0 decimals and then put the 1000 separator. And you can see all the numbers in the pivot table. As much as I just right clicked on one, they all became they were formatted with 1000 separator, so long as the number is above 1000. Now, even as we proceed, just to mention to those who are just coming in, if you have any question, we shall take them at the far end. So I'll just first do the presentation and then we can take the questions. You can note them down on the chat or you will raise them at the end of the session. So that's the first thing that I usually do. I change the layout of the report so that I can get proper column labels, the yellow ones, on this report. Now, the other thing you can do from the design tab is to control whether you want to see these rows which are highlighted, the subtotals, and the one column H is the grand total. If you go to the very bottom, you also have the grand total down here. So probably you have a choice or control on what you want to show on the report, and that's what you can control from the design tab. If you go to the left side, you have subtotals. If I choose to do not show, then you'll notice they disappear. Okay, it depends on the needs that you want to meet, but you can also choose to show them at top or bottom. The top one usually works with the outline, but yeah, it will take the bottom, which for me it's a better approach as opposed to the top. Now for the grand total as well, you can choose to show them or not to show. You can control whether you want to show them for a given column, for the columns or the rows. So in this case, I would want to just show them for the columns. So I choose the last one, on for columns only. And these ones, there's nothing cast in stone. It depends on what you want to see at the end of the day. So you'll notice I still have the grand totals at the bottom, but the one that was in column H is no longer there. So that's what you do if you want to remove the grand totals. Now, the other thing that you may want to do is to set up a number of things so that you can, change these settings. Every time you're creating a pivot table, the settings that we are doing, number formatting, the change of layout, any other thing that we're going to update in terms of setting, you'll always have to repeat that. But sometimes you may want to set the default settings so that you don't have to repeat the same process. For instance, if I go back to design and the layout, probably I want to repeat all item labels. And this is one of the things that I find most people have no idea what it is. When I say repeat all item labels, I want you to pay attention to the first column that has the product category where you have the gaps. So if I choose repeat all item labels, you can see it repeats those labels downstream so that you don't have gaps. And that's the other tip when it comes to pivot tables. You can choose to show them or not show them at all. If I say do not repeat, then it will appear like that. Sometimes you need to show them because you just probably want to do a VLOOKUP out of the pivot table later on. And you may want to fill those gaps by just repeating all item labels. If I uncheck these row headers from the design tab, where I'm pointing at, then it will not emphasize the first column. It will no longer be bold. So some of the settings like those ones, you can make them default. Now, how do you make the pivot tables to take a default setting? So you go to the file, then you look for options, and under options, you can go to data. This is where you'll find the default choices. And this one gives you the ability to make changes to the default layout. We say the default is the compact. Now, this option to change the default layout is available if you have Excel 2019 or higher. So please take note of that. Don't go and try it out and then you say you didn't see what I presented. It's in Excel 2019 or higher. But yeah, let me just go ahead and change a few things here. So in case you want the default layout to not have subtotals, you can update here as need be, okay, and grand totals as well. Maybe I just want to have on for columns by default and the report layout to be tabular, okay. I can change that, but if I have already made the changes, because I'm inside the pivot table, you can see it's selected B8 here, and it gives me the option to import. And therefore, if I click import, it will take whatever settings that are in that pivot table, including repeating all item labels, which you can further update. Then I'll go to the pivot table options here, okay. Then it will give me more options. For instance, in case you have empty rows, probably you just want to show them with zeros. Probably I can update that one to be 0. The default behavior of pivot tables is to auto-fit column widths depending on what is on the cells. But for me, I like controlling that myself. If I need the column to be wider, I just put it wider to whatever extent. And that's because I usually use pivot tables for dashboards, and I don't want it to interfere with the final output by resizing some of the fields that I'm using in the dashboard. So you can make those changes here in case there is any other thing you'd want to update here. For instance, if you look at B5, cell B5, cell B11, those ones have plus minus buttons to expand or collapse. So I usually also put them on or off depending on the need. In most cases, I just put them off. So I uncheck that option. And further, you can update these other settings, which I will not go into, but I just usually remove contextual tooltips, which are the tooltips that appear when you hover over a cell in a pivot table. So if I just say OK and OK, if I create a new pivot table, it will take those defaults that we have set. And that is set globally. Even in future Excel files within this machine, it will always take that as the default settings. So that's all about the settings. The other tip that I would want to cover is when you're creating pivot tables. Remember, we started by going to, we were in this data set and we went to Insert tab and we picked pivot table as the option from the Insert tab. And then it created this sheet 1 as the new worksheet. But you may want not to keep repeating that process. And for me, I prefer not, to repeat that process. So usually I do the settings on the first pivot table, and then afterwards I do copy paste. And that's the other tip, especially if you're dealing with huge data set. By default, pivot tables has what we call a pivot cache. And that can make your files bloated if it's a lot of data. If it's a small data set, no harm. You can just create a new pivot table altogether. So I'll just remove the fields from this pivot table apart from the amount. Then we can roll with the rest of the concepts. One of the things I would want to do in cell B3, I would want to rename it. Maybe instead of sum of amount, you can call it maybe total sales, you can call it revenue, depending on what you're analyzing. What you cannot call it is amount, because amount is a column in our source data, so we can't give it the same name. So let me just call this one sales, and I will align it to the right side. So usually I just do this as a starting point, and then if there are any settings that I would need to do, I just do them once, and for the rest of the pivot tables, I will just be copy pasting this one as the original pivot table, and then we go through the different concepts that we want to go through. So let me just Control C and copy. So I'll just paste it down here in row number 8. and then make a change. As you can see, it comes with the contextual menus, so it didn't lose the the pivot table features by just copy pasting, and that makes life easy because I can do work faster. So the rest, what I would want to do here is to put the sales rep in the rows. I said if you just put a check mark, it will always go into the rows. So these are the sales reps that we have, and this gives us the breakdown for this pivot table. Now, one of the things you'd want to do with pivot tables is probably show this performance of these people as a percent of total. Now, most people come here on the side and they say equals, and then select the cell in that cell and say divide by the grand total. And once you do that and enter, it will give you that as a decimal, which is fine. You can always change the formatting, but you can see what happens when you autofill downstream. It just gives you the same number. Now that you can update if you're okay with pivot tables and the formulas. Let me Control Z to undo. But this is not supposed to be the way you do it. So in this third tip, I'm mentioning two things. One is how do you disable these get pivot data? For me, I find it a bit annoying, and it's not easy to work with for most people. So I just go ahead and put it off. So when I'm inside the pivot table, let me first delete that cell. If I'm inside the pivot table, I'll go to the Analyze tab. I said that would be the Options tab in some versions. Then on the left side, where you have the pivot table name, you have the options. And next to the options, there's a small drop down or arrow there. And if you click that small arrow, you'll see the option that says Generate Get Pivot Data, and that has been checked. So you just uncheck that one. And this one, again, you just do it once. For the rest of the pivot tables, not just in this file, for the other files, it will not have that. So if I come back here and I want to do the same, you can see now it doesn't give me the formula as we had before. It just gives me the cell reference, which is much easier to work with. But that was get pivot data. But how do you change the numbers that you see here to the percent of the total that you see here? So in pivot tables, there are two things I want to mention here. First is that you can put both, the amount field twice or even thrice in this pivot table. So of course, when you're putting it the second time, you don't put a check mark like you want to put a check mark. You drag so that, because if you just go like checking, it will just uncheck and remove it from the pivot table. So I've put it the second time, and you can see here I get the same numbers as a second column. So what I will do here is to right click the second column, and here you can see you have several options under show values as. Then we'll be covering a few of these today, but for now I want to go with percent of grand total. Okay, so that will give you this breakdown as a percent of grand total. And of course, if you right click, you can sort largest to smallest. So that's the next tip. How do you change this to percent of total? And you can rename this one to percent of total accordingly. Okay, so that's the percent of total. Now, the other thing I would want us to look at, looking at the show values as feature that we've seen, how do you create maybe running totals in the years, maybe over the months for those who do year-to-date calculations? How do you do change from one month to another? So I will just copy paste my original pivot table. I told you that my secret, I will just put it in column G, the same row, row number 8. Usually I skip a few columns. Mostly I like working within the same worksheet when I'm creating pivots, but just skip a few columns in between so that the pivots, in case the first one expands, it doesn't overlap with this one and give you trouble. So for this second one, I would want to bring in the year in the rows, and then bring in the month, put it again in the rows like that. So it will give us this breakdown. And because I had enabled the repeat item labels, I probably want to remove that one. Do not repeat from design tab so that it appears like this. Now with this one, I just want to bring in the amount one more time. I put it in the values and I will put it two more times. So it will always be sum of amount 1 and 2 and so forth. For the second one, I want to create a running total from January to December. So to do that, you simply right click the second column that we put there and we do show values as. Then you have this option that says running total in. So there are two of those. There is percent running total in and there is running total in. The running total in is going to give you the absolute numbers, but the percent running total in will give you the numbers cumulatively as a percent. So let's go with the running total in. And then here it will ask us what is the base field. Is it the year? Is it the month? I think it is okay to retain the month because we are doing the running total, the year to date within the month. So I have to right click here and choose the number format again. Usually there is no way to sort of have this number format. Even if you set it as the default table layout, it doesn't persist unless probably you use Power Pivot. So you can see here the numbers up to this point, that sums up to 40,000, and that's the number that you see in that cell. So it will be cumulative by just doing that, and then it will reset in the next year, January, and then starts accumulating again. So this gives you probably, let me just call it running total or year to date. In case your year runs from January to December, that would come in handy. The other thing that probably would want to calculate is to see what is the change or growth from maybe Jan to Feb. That's one choice, Feb to March. Alternatively, from January of 2020 to January of 2021, what is the percentage change? So in that case, you right click this second field here, is actually the third one, but the last one in this field, and choose percentage difference from, because you want the difference, the variance as a percent. So I'll go with percentage difference from. If you want the absolute, you go with difference from, percentage difference from, and then here it will ask you what's the basis. The base field is the month. If you want the year-on-year percentage change, then you'd choose year in this case. If I choose month, then it will be month-on-month growth rate. The base item is the calculation. What is the base value? In this case, we'll change this to previous so that it always checks what is the previous row and give you that calculations. If I do that, you can see it gives us that percentage change, and you can see, for instance, from November to December of 2020, 4 million to 10 million, that is 115% growth rate, that cell there. So that's how you change or calculate the growth rate from one month to another. If I bring in the amount one more time, then we can do the same and get the year-on-year change by saying percentage difference from, but instead of month, we can choose year and again retain previous. If we say okay, you can see in January 2021 or even February, this row, the change from 8 million to 11 million is about 36% growth rate, and that's how you'd go about. So let me rename this one like that. So that's how you change the default calculations within a pivot table. The next thing I would want us to look at is how do you sort within a pivot table? How do you sort? For instance, let me just create a new. I just go ahead and copy the original pivot table. Then I come here on the right side, I'll skip 2 columns and paste. I find this method first. I will bring in the segment and put it in the rows. So these are the segment, the product segments. Or maybe let me work with the product category. It's a bit manageable. So this is the breakdown by product category. And as you can see, it gives me the breakdown. Probably you'd want this to always be sorted in a certain order. Recently, I was working with a client, and there's a way that when they are presenting, the way they group their products, it has to always follow a certain order. Now, you can sort by the sales here, either ascending to or descending to ascending. But when it comes to these labels, you don't have much leeway. So unless you're working with pivot tables power pivots, then you can define the sort order. But in this case, you have the option. For instance, if you want these braids to always be at the top, you can select it like that. You see, when I hover over, there is dark arrow that appears. It will select the entire row. Then when I hover over in between the two rows, you see that four-sided arrows. Then I can drag like that. I put it at the top. Then it will appear at the top like that. And you can do that with any other field here. That's still acceptable. But also something else that you can do is to type. For instance, if I want maybe sanitary to be at the very top, I would come at the very top cell and type sanitary. As you type it, of course, it will give you that, and that will be put at the top, and then it will rearrange the rest of the fields. So probably if, below that, I want to have hair care, then I can type that, and the rest of the fields will update accordingly. Deodorants and so forth and so on. So you can do that. You can drag or you can type the fields as need be. So that's how you can reorder the different fields that you do have in your pivot table. The other thing I would want us to look at is how do you create probably the top 10, top 3, that kind of analysis. So allow me to bring in the pivot table one more time. I had already copied. Let me just go home and again put a copy of this. I will paste it here on the side and bring in, instead of the columns we've worked with, let me bring in the customer name and put it in the rows. Okay, so you'll get the breakdown for the various customers. Again, these are dummy data, so you can, if you see your company here, it's just coincidental. Now I have about 300 customers buying from me, and this is the amounts that they have bought. So probably for some reason you want to focus on the ones who are least performing, the bottom 20, bottom 15, and so forth. So the starting point is to create the report with all the customers. Then you'll see this filter button against this column. If you click that one, then you can filter using the value filters. If you hover over, you can see this option that says top 10, and within this top 10, if I just click, you get this new dialog box. The default is top 10, and you can see top 10 items by sales. If you have more than sales, then it will give you that option to choose which field to use. So in this case, you can update the 10 maybe to 5 or 15. Maybe let me go with 15 and say okay. So it will give me the top 15 customers by their sales. They will not be sorted, so you can go ahead and right click and choose to sort largest to smallest like that. But this is the top 15 list and the amount that they are bringing to the business. If you don't want top, you can go back to the same filter, value filters, top 10. And instead of top, you can choose bottom. Then it will give you the top, let me be 5. Then these are the ones who are bringing the least amount to the business. So that's how you do the top 10 or bottom X, top N analysis in your report. Now, the next thing I would want us to do, let me paste my report again so that I show you how do you group data. How do you group data? If you're working with pivot tables, let me just paste it here on the side. And I have a date field in a pivot table. I have a date field. So for this new pivot table, I want to bring in the date field in the columns, sorry, in the rows. That is the month end date. I put it in the rows. Okay. So it will give you the breakdown like this per month. Okay. In some instances, depending on your settings, it may give you the groupings per year, per quarter, and the months. Mine just gave me this breakdown without that grouping. But if this is the starting point and you want to see the breakdown per quarter, of course, this is calendar based, normal year, January to December. If yours is a different financial period, then you can always change from the source data. But if your year is the same as the calendar year, you just put your dates there, then you right click and you'll get the option here that says to group. So if I group, usually it will give you the starting and the ending date. It will scan your source data and give you the starting, and therefore you have these different choices here. So probably if you just want to see the years and quarters, you just select. If you want to deselect, you click it one more time. So let me maintain years and quarters, then I will have that grouping like that. Let me just remove these do not repeat so that it will appear like that. So you can see the breakdown per year, per quarter. So if your months start in July, then you'd have to go to the source data and create an additional column that defines your financial period. But this one will work with calendar years as such. So that's how you'd group the dates. But sometimes it's not just the dates that you want to group. Probably you have, let me just go to a new data set here so that I illustrate. So I have this data set here that gives me for a client certain invoices, their regions, the date when the invoice was raised and the invoice due date and the amount thereof. So in case you want to create what people call the aging analysis, you want to see how many days have this invoice been outstanding. If it was supposed to be paid on 14th of May 2023 and it's yet to be paid, how many days are in between? So you can create that as an additional column. Allow me to do it very quickly. It will be equals today, so up to date, then I less the invoice due date. When I enter, usually it will give you that as a date format, but all you need to is to come to home and change the update this to general so that you can see the number of days. So if I send it down like that, you can see it gives me the number of days that invoice has been outstanding. If I highlight those ones which are less than 0, meaning they have a negative number, they are not yet due, then you can see the ones that are not yet due. So if I create a pivot table out of this through the same process, I go to Insert tab, click Pivot Table. I want to go with the defaults here. Just press OK. Then it will give me this layout again. As you can see, I didn't have to update this field setting. It is a different file. I mean, it's still there. So if I take the amount and then I take the number of days and I put it in the rows, you can see it gives me for each day what has been the amount outstanding. But you just want to group these ones so that you have 30 to 60, 61 to 90, 91 to, and so forth, 0 to 30 days. So all you have to do is to come to this field that has the days, and then you don't have to highlight, you just right click and choose to group. When you group, then you'll get this dialog box. Again, this one detects, depending on your source data, the starting and the ending point, and the grouping by is the number of days in between. Now, if I just retain this and probably let me change the 10 to 30 and I say okay, you can see it will take from the earliest date and add 30 days and then keep grouping like that. But what I want is to group such that 0 to 30 is in its own bracket. Anything that is less than 0 days, meaning it's not due, I want that to be on its own bucket. But anything that is 121 days and above, again, that also needs to be on its own bucket. So if I right click again and I choose group, then here I can update this instead of starting from minus 39, which is the earliest number of days in our source data, if I put 0 and the ending point, I say 120, like that, and still go by 30 days in between, check what will happen to the report. So it will group the data from less than 0, then 0 to 29, and so forth. So probably because I want 1 to 30, 31 to 60, I should update these. If I go back to group, instead of starting from 0, I put 1 and I say okay. So anything that is less than 1, then 1 to 30, and so forth. Anything that is above 120 will be grouped and put in one bucket. So that's how you do edging analysis within a pivot table if you're working with the number of days the invoice has been outstanding. And of course, if you're analyzing the units of sales and you want to see what is the frequent kind of a bucket in terms of the units of products that are being bought in one go, then you can do the same procedure. Now, the next thing I would want to mention here, let me go back to our initial pivots here. We have created several of them, as you can see here, but the data that we have is actually grouped. For instance, if I come to this first pivot that has the sales rep breakdown, when I see 99 million for Sheena, that is for all the years, all the quarters, and everything else. Now, one of the things you realize, not many people know that you can filter this report, and most people just go inside this filters box and apply the filter. But for me, I prefer if we can just do an interactive filter. So I'll come to the original pivot table here and then go to pivot table analyze or options in for those who have 2010 or earlier. Then you'll see here in the middle, insert slicer. So that's the next thing that you may want to do with a pivot table. You can insert a slicer from here. If you click this one, it will always give you the listing of all the columns coming from your data source. And then you just put a check mark on what fields you want to use to do the filters. So if in case you want to go with the year and the region, then you can go ahead and put a check mark on the two. If I say okay, you'll get the two slicers here, okay, like that, and you can resize them accordingly depending on what you want to see. Now that's one way you can go about doing the slicer. The alternative is to go on the right side where you have the field list, and if you right click, for instance, if I choose product category, I right click on it, I get this option again that says add as slicer. So it will add that specific field as a slicer. So I'll not add that one for now, but here you can use either of the two approaches. Now, when it comes to the slicers, two things about the slicers. The first one is the pivot table in which you're in by the time you put in the slicer is the only one that will respond. If I click central like this, you can see the numbers in column B are updating this cell B4 as I click that. If I change the year, it will also update. The rest of the pivots don't update by default. Now, the way to go about, updating the rest of the pivots is to right click a given slicer. If you right click, you will see report connections or pivot table connections, depending on your version. Report connections, if I click that one, then I will see all the pivots that I have created that are sharing the same data source. Okay, that's important. All the pivots that are sharing the same data source. So if I choose to enable for all this, I just need to put a check mark on all this. If you don't want any pivot table to be filtered, then for instance, and you can see they're usually serialized. So it's good practice for you to rename your pivot tables, because if you don't, then you can't tell which one you should leave unchecked for this slicer. For instance, I wanted to have this pivot table that has the breakdown by year and month. I didn't want her to have it checked for the year. So I don't know which pivot number it is currently. I'm just hoping it's pivot table 3. So let me uncheck 3 and put on 2. I can confirm that from the pivot table analyze. Yeah, it's actually, on the left side, it's pivot table 3. So I was right. So if I click the rest of the pivots, let me close this field button on the right side here. If I click FY21, you can see this report will not change, but the rest of the reports will update depending on what you select. And this becomes even better if you create charts out of these reports and summarize them in a dashboard format. Now, the same case with the region, I would right click and choose report connections. You can also do the same from the slicer contextual tab there. It's the last one. If you go on the left side, you see report connections, and then you can put the ones that you want to put a check mark on. I know pivot table 2 is the one that has the sales reps, so I can go ahead and put all this to be filtered by the region, and therefore if I click Nairobi or Central and so forth, it will respond accordingly. So that's how you create slicers. Now, with the slicers, you can update their layout or their styles by going to slicer and then updating. You can select whichever layout that you prefer here or the style. And you can also customize by right-clicking that and maybe duplicate that and then make the changes that you want to make. Now, if for some reason you're able to locate a file out there, or even your colleague has created a custom slicer for you, then you can go ahead and copy and paste that slicer to this, and that's another tip there. So if I go to this my folder, I have my friend called Chandip, who is in India, and he's also an Excel person. So I saw this report here, which he had created, and I loved these slicers, which when you hover over, you can see what happens to this slicer. It just gives me a feel like these ones are like website buttons. So if I'm happy with this one, I don't want to repeat the formatting. He has already done the heavy lifting. I can copy that and then come back here. I paste it on this report where I'm working from, and then if I select the year slicer and go to the slicer tab up here, I will see the custom layout here, which I've copied from an external file. So if I select that one, then it will take that in terms of the styling. Then I can do the same with this other slicer. When we are still here, we can update. You can see the one I copied is lying horizontal. So you can do that from the slicer tab on the right side where you have the columns. By default, it will always be one column, but you can update the number of items that you have. In our case, the region has 4, so I'll update it to 4. And that's what you'll see on the screen. And then you can resize so that it's something that you can read on screen. And you can do the same with the year. Maybe this one we do just 2 because we only have 2. So once you do the changes on your slicers, you can then delete the one you copied from that external file. Awesome. So I'm almost coming to an end. You can put your questions on the chat so that we're able to respond to them after this. So I want to cover maybe 1 more or 3 more tips because I can see it's almost time. It's 1 hour session. So let me go ahead and make a copy of the pivot again that we have here. I like just copy pasting so that I can just change what I need to change. I will put it here. Now you'll notice because I had closed the field list that was here on the right side, I can't see it. In case you just lose your selection or the field list selection, you can always right click inside the pivot table. The last thing that you see down here is show field list. If I click that one, then it will come up again. You can also do the same from Analyze tab, the one that you see here on the right that is selected field list. If I put it off, it goes away. If I highlight it, it comes back. So for this one, I want to put in probably the breakdown by channel. So that's the way it will appear. but probably for this breakdown by channel, I want to see or to filter for a given region or even product category. So if I want to put the product category in the filters, you can see it appears above my report, and I can go ahead and filter for a specific report here. For instance, if I just want to get body and facial, then I can do that. I will get that breakdown, but specifically for body and facial. But in case you want this to be put in separate worksheets, each of these items that you see here for your selection, then you can do it with one click. So you'll go to Analyze tab or Options, depending on your version. Again, you'll come to this Options button. Okay, if you go there, because we have something in the filter, we get this option that says show report filter pages. If I just click that one, then you'll notice at the bottom of my screen where you have the worksheets, then it will give you the breakdown for each of the product category. Let me just go ahead and click that. You can see it gives me that choice, but it's the only one. So you can see at the bottom here, let me see, that didn't seem like it worked because probably I had only one item selected. Maybe let me just go back and select again everything. Let me go back to Analyze and Show Report Filter Pages. If I click that one and I say OK, you'll notice now it gives you the list of worksheets per each product category that was put in the filters. So you don't have to select a specific one at that point. So that's how you'd go about creating multiple reports from one. Now, I wish to wind up there, but as I wind up, allow me to mention something. We started with this raw data set, and with this raw data set, this is what we would call maybe clean data, but data will not always be in this structure. So it gives you this list like this, but in some cases, you may get data that looks like this. Okay, so somebody may give you data that looks like this. It's the same data, but now instead of having proper columns, like one for the months, it gives you the breakdown across board. Now, the intention or what you should always aim at is to create this layout in preparation of your pivot tables. Creating your pivot tables. So how do you come from this layout to the one on the right? Okay, so that is not something that I will cover in this session, but it's called unpivoting. It's called unpivoting because if you were to create a pivot table out of this layout, what that means is that you'll have to drag and drop 12 times in a pivot table for you to see that breakdown. But if you have this layout, it's simply one column that you select and drag once, and then it gives you the breakdown. And it's more dynamic with this structure. So I will point you to a video that I've done that gives you the steps that you can go and I know my friend Crispo mentioned at the beginning, you can support me on YouTube, you can subscribe there, but I have this video called Unpivot in Power Query. So this one you can do if you have Power Query from Excel 2010 and above, which is so if you go and search data cycle analytics there, I know Crispo will give you the links after this, but you'll get that video that teaches you how do you move from this layout to this optimal structure. And finally, as I wrap up, if you look at this, if you look at these product categories, I have this I have put these emojis and images. This one I will not cover because this one is recently being updated. But if you have some emojis that you want to use, maybe you have a data that has gender, male and female, and you want to show those in a slicer, then you can put them as emojis. To do an emoji, you just press the window key on your keyboard plus the period, that is the dot, and then you will search whichever emoji that you want to use here. I've already done that for you. So if I come back to this data set, I want to insert a new field here, and maybe you can use VLOOKUP to bring it back. It's this category. Let me just go ahead and say this is category emoji. So this is the last thing I'm doing, and you can see it updates because we formatted this at the beginning to be a special table. It will update. So it will say, I want to, let me just use XLOOKUP for this category, put a comma. I want to look that up here. Let me just press F4, sorry, F4 to lock. And then, sorry, I pressed F3 accidentally, so it didn't lock properly. Come back again, and I want to return the emojis and enter. So it will give me the emojis, which I can combine by adding an ampersand with a space in between, another ampersand, and then take the category. So if I enter like that, then it will give me the emoji that goes with that category. And if I come back to our reports, which we were doing, let me just see, it was under sheet 1 here. If I want to use the product category for this report as a slicer, let me right click and show feed list. I come back here. You will not see that new column here, but that's the advantage I was mentioning at the beginning. For any of these pivots, you will not see it. But if you want to see it in one go, you go to data and refresh all. There's this button that says refresh all. It will do that for all your pivot tables. And that's the advantage of doing it using your special Excel tables. So you'll see that column appears here. And if I right click that one, I add as a slicer, then you'll see this beautiful slicer here. Apparently it doesn't come color coded, but at least it gives you something off the norm. And if you select anything here, you can see the breakdown for each of them. So I think there are many more tips when it comes to pivot tables, but if you allow me, I want to land the plane there and take any questions from that point going forward. Over to you, Crispo.
Thank you, William. I thought I knew pivot tables, but I've learned a lot. Number one, I didn't know how to switch off the get pivot. I think thank you for that. And also how to insert the new slicer, custom slicer. That is also new. And also typing for you when you are doing the regrouping. And I think that's a very, very handy tip. I always moved one cell after another. I think that's very, very nice. My question is, let me start with the emojis on the pivot tables.
Yeah.
Not on the slicer, but on the pivot tables.
Sorry, the emojis on the pivot.
Yes.
You'd want to use them as part of that here, like in this report.
Yeah.
Sure. Actually, yeah, you can do that. Let me interchange. In this report, I had done category. If I remove it here and bring in that one, it also comes with that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I have never gone to that far in pivot tables, so I don't know whether there are any questions. If you have a question, you can put your hand up. I will unmute you, or you can type. Or there's somebody who is saying whether we are going to share the training and hopefully the workbook. you do that?
Yeah, sure. I can share the file, then you share with the audience.
Okay. Anybody with a question? Anybody with a comment? If there are any questions, William.
Okay.
Thank you very much. The last question that I usually ask is, now people have seen what you have done. How did you get to where you are? If somebody wants to get to where you are, what are the processes they need to take?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. I guess it's a matter of practice in any field. They say it takes 10,000 hours to master something. So I guess I've done the 10,000 for myself. I started very green in 2012 when I joined a training company, and I was told I'll be training Excel. So from that time onwards, it has been YouTube and Google and courses online, and following people that are doing the same online. So every time I'm trying to learn new concepts, so when I'm doing a search maybe on Google, you'll find my browser has like 30 tabs which I've opened. So by the time I open each one of them, I will come up with several new ways of doing something. Yeah.
Okay. Any last tip that you want to give to beginners and experts?
Sure. I think what I would say is we all start somewhere, and we can build pivots, we can build other formulas to just make life easier. My mission usually is to help people to, make life easier and work faster in Excel. And it's all about learning a few things here and there. So it would mean somebody goes online and maybe immerses themselves uh, on YouTube or Google, or they pay for a certain course. We have some of them, like the one you've shared on chat. Somebody can get that course on Udemy. Udemy is a platform that gives people, a place you can market your courses there. So if you go there and just search for Kiarie, we are not many in that platform. Then you'll see this first one up here. That's me, effective charts and visualizations. This one I go in depth on charts, but in case one needs to learn, the idea is to maybe find a structured course that will take you from beginner progressively so that you don't have to keep jumping. YouTube is good if you have time, but I prefer going for a structured course. Currently, this is what I have, but more is coming. I think we shall liaise and we give a shout in case there is a new course. Thank you.
Yeah. There's somebody called Samir is asking for dashboard. You maybe later on you can come and do a presentation on dashboard. But before then, do you have anything on dashboard that you are selling or some videos that you have done on dashboards?
I would say they are still in the pipeline as of now, but if one goes into this YouTube channel, there are a few concepts that I cover there about charts and dashboards, probably in Power BI. In fact, there is one that covers from start to end of Power BI and gives one breakdown of that. But there are other videos standalone, but probably towards the end of the year, we shall have that ready. You can always check from my LinkedIn or go to Data Psychoanalytics. You'll always see the updates there under online courses. We'll just update as time goes by, but yeah, they will be on this platform that I am showing up there.
Okay. I think that's it. I don't see any other question. So all I can, okay. Gila Mulay is asking any formal MS meetup for Excel. Is there any formal, do you have any meetups on your own other than whatever you're having right now? Maybe physical meetups, online meetups that you can invite all of us.
Okay. I think to be forthright and honest, we were chatting with Crispo at the onset of this session, and we've been postponing this for a while. But we thank God that this has come. So Crispo is doing a good thing to just bring us together. We haven't had physical ones, but we will first measure on the virtual ones once we get momentum. Usually have monthly classes here in Nairobi for those who are in Kenya. So I usually advertise them on the website. But before then, since Crispo is doing this every 2 weeks, then we can catch up and learn a few things on this platform. But you'll see me, if you're on LinkedIn, I plan to do live sessions there because I have that capacity on that platform. So you can be on the lookout.
Okay. There's another friend of mine on LinkedIn called Oscar Mendes. He's saying very useful tips. My question is, what do you think about the people that says that array formulas are overcoming the pivot tables? Are array formulas seriously replacing pivot tables?
I don't think so. It's only that people are in love with array formulas, which give you more flexibility. But what you realize is for you to create a pivot table using the array formulas, then you also need to be very sharp with them. So I don't think it will, and especially because most of the people who are in the workplace are not like very advanced. So something like pivot tables would be here to stay and being the backbone even for other BI tools like Power BI and Tableau and the rest of the tools which follow a similar flow of pivot tables. I think it's here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, Oscar is very, very good with array formulas. I usually look at his formulas for hours trying to think what he has done. But so Oscar, don't worry, pivot tables are here to stay, hopefully for a long time. So it's good for all of us, I think, to learn our pivot tables.
Yeah, at least in our lifetime, Crispo.
Yes, in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Samir is asking Tableau, saying Tableau is better or Power BI is better. Which is better between Tableau and Power BI?
Well, I think the answer I've seen to that question is the tool that you have at hand is the better one. So you realize I love Excel, but some people say I prefer to use Google Sheet. It's more flexible, and because that's what they use at the workplace. But I think for me, because I use Power BI a lot, I would go with Power BI any day, and especially because of the data transformation features in Power Query. It gives you much more. You can't even compare with Tableau in terms of data preparation. So any day with Power BI, but yeah, if the company uses Tableau, that would be the better one.
Okay. Good answer. The tool that you have at hand is the better one. True. If there are no other question, I think we can wind it up there. Gira is saying the meetups will be beneficial, especially for university students looking for jobs-related skills, because there are many more emphasis on Excel at the university level, which is true, particularly HR and accounting students. Or now that Gila has raised up that question, what do you think about the accounting students not being taught Excel as part of their course? And is there anything that you are doing about that?
Well, it's quite unfortunate that I don't know whether in other countries it's the same, but what you realize when you leave college, even for other courses, what you meet on at the workplace is quite different from what you are taught in school, and therefore, I think Excel should be taught. Like personally, I'm a statistician. I did statistics in school, but it was just a small percentage when it comes to Excel, but yet when it gets to the workplace, in fact, 90%, only a small clique will be using Python and R and the others. So I think it would be a great addition to these courses. I saw CASNEB, which is the local body that does accounting, is having something on data analytics. Hopefully that can be included, the Excel as part of the tools. So I try to join groups on Facebook that are account based so that I can sensitize people. But yeah, in terms of targeting the university students, I think that would be great, Ngila, to do that so that we empower them even as they leave college to have job ready skills.
True. If there are no other questions, I think well done, William. It's a start. Hopefully, we are going to see you back again, giving us an overview on our dashboards and a bit of Power Query. I thought you do actually the unpivoting in Power Query. I find it very interesting, but people should be able to visit your YouTube page. I'll share the YouTube page and other pages by William. And please go by his Udemy course. As he said, is part of growing as a professional, not just taking the free stuff from YouTube, but also buying paid course. So William, thank you, and until next time, have a